It had been 9 months since Bo and his father fought alongside me to protect our home. 9 months since I watched them tear through a pack of dogmen like they were born for war. And in truth, they were. Bo had changed since then. He still returned home every night, still sat beside Abigail on the porch and ate from the same spot he always did. But more and more, he spent his daylight hours deep in the woods with his father. They disappeared together every morning without a word. Sometimes he came back just before sunset, sometimes not until the moon was already high. I never questioned it, not at first. Bo was part of something older than us. I had come to understand that. But after a while, the feeling started to creep back, that slow, crawling unease in my chest, the one I used to feel before things went bad. I'd step outside in the evening and look out toward the tree line, and the wind would blow the wrong way. The stillness would sit too heavy on the trees. Abigail tried to keep me grounded. "He's just bonding with his father," she told me once. "They have years to make up for." She wasn't wrong, but I knew the forest, and I knew what it felt like when something was about to happen. Then one night, Bo didn't come home. I waited until the fire was nothing but glowing coals. Abigail eventually stood and rested her hand on my shoulder. "He's with him," she said softly. "He's okay." But I couldn't shake the feeling. The unease had become a drumbeat in my chest. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, grabbed my gear, and strapped my rifles across my back. Abigail followed me to the door. "You don't have to go after him. He's not a child anymore." "I know," I said, "but I need to know that he's okay." She hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful, please. I need you to stay with your sister, just until I get back. If something's wrong out there, I don't want you in harm's way." Her face tensed. "Okay." I watched her taillights vanish into the dark before I turned toward the woods. Tracking Bo and his father wasn't difficult. Their prints were fresh, deep from the soft soil left by the recent rain. Bo's were massive, his father's even larger. They moved deeper into the mountains, north, toward old-growth woods. No one ever went. I'd hunted these ridges for years and never stepped foot where they had gone. The hours passed like minutes. The trail wound through gullies and over mossy hills, deeper into silence. Even the birds were absent. The deeper I went, the more wrong the world felt. Time didn't feel right there. The forest was older, the air was still. The ground changed from dense brush to soft, dark earth. The trees parted, revealing something I never expected to see. A clearing, wide and quiet, and in the middle of it, rows and rows of stone mounds. Graves. They weren't human. They weren't recent. Some were shaped from massive slabs of stone. Others were simple, covered in moss and woven with vines, sunken into the earth with age. I counted dozens at first. Then I realized there were hundreds. This wasn't just a burial site. It was a cemetery, a sacred place. Standing near one of the graves, I saw them. Bo and his father. They were kneeling, silent. Bo's father placed a hand over one small, plain grave that was unmarked. Bo knelt beside him, his broad shoulders hunched. He didn't move. And I didn't move either. I just watched. It didn't take much to realize what I was seeing. This was his mother, and they were mourning. No words, no sound, just moving there, hands through the grave gently. A long while passed before they stood. Bo's father placed a hand on Bo's shoulder and pointed to the center of the clearing. There, rising from the middle of the cemetery, was a single massive tree. Gnarled and thick, twisted by age and weather, it looked as old as the mountains. The bark was dark gray, almost silver, and its roots spread in all directions, like veins. Bo followed his father toward it. Then Bo's father did something strange. He grabbed Bo's wrist and placed his hand against the trunk of the tree. The moment Bo's skin met the bark, he seized. His eyes fluttered, his body tensed. He dropped to one knee, gasping. Something was happening. The tree began to pulse, not literally, not like a heartbeat, but something radiated from it, like warmth through stone, like time itself moved through the bark. Bo twitched. He looked like he was in a trance. I stepped forward, slow, unsure. Bo's father turned and looked at me. He didn't growl or threaten. He just nodded. I reached them as Bo stood again, breathless. He looked at me, then took my hand in his massive grip and pressed it to the tree. Then everything changed. My vision exploded with light. And then, visions of a history I never knew existed. I saw Bigfoots, hundreds of them, waging war. They fought dogmen. They fought wendigos. They fought creatures I didn't even have names for. Shadow things, twisted humans. Then I saw them, Nephilim, towering humanoid giants with black eyes and a hunger behind them that terrified me. The Bigfoots were guardians, protectors of the earth, warriors of balance, and they had been doing it for centuries. Some fell, some rose again, but they never stopped protecting. When the vision ended, I staggered backward, nearly collapsing. Bo caught me. His father steadied me. I knew now I wasn't just some hunter who stumbled into their world. I was part of it now. Raising Bo, fighting beside them, being bound to this sacred place. I wasn't ready for what came next. Bo's ears perked. His father turned sharply. Then came the sound. Chains, dragging, followed by a growl. Two dogmen stepped from the woods. Their eyes burned yellow, but their snarls were subdued. Around their necks hung thick iron collars, heavy chains snaking back into the darkness. And behind them, a massive shape emerged, twice the size of Bo's father. A man, or something like it, skin like pale stone, muscles packed tight across his frame. His eyes, completely black, no whites, no iris, just endless dark. The Nephilim, a giant, real and alive, holding the chains. The dogmen tensed, foam frothing at their mouths. The giant released the chains. Bo stepped forward. His father growled. I raised my rifle, and the battle began. The chains hit the ground like a death knell. Then the dogmen sprang forward. Bo's father was already moving, an explosion of muscle and fur. He slammed into the first dogman before it reached the burial mounds, gripping its throat and tossing it into a tree with enough force to split bark from trunk. Bo charged the second one, their bodies colliding with a thud that sent vibrations through the ground. The dogman snarled, its claws swiping across Bo's chest, but Bo was unfazed. He wrapped his arms around it and lifted, slamming it back first into the forest floor. I scrambled for cover behind one of the large stone mounds, unslinging my rifle and bracing against the dirt. The giant hadn't moved yet, just stood there, black eyes watching everything, with a kind of cruel patience. Then it took its first step forward. It was like a tree moving, slow, full of bad intentions, and inevitable. The two dogmen, staggered but not dead, circled around Bo and his father, trying to flank them again. But Bo didn't let up. He leapt higher than I'd ever seen and grabbed a branch nearly 15 feet up. He swung his body around it with a fluid motion that shouldn't have been possible for something his size. Then he launched himself off the tree, landing on the back of the dogman mid-sprint. They tumbled end over end, but Bo came out on top, fists pounding the beast's face until bone cracked under the force. His father didn't stay grounded either. He too disappeared into the trees. One moment on the forest floor, the next, a flash of fur in the branches above. He dropped down on the second dogman like a meteor, both fists crashing into its shoulders with a crunch that echoed through the area. The Nephilim giant roared. It didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't loud because of volume. It was loud because it felt like it was inside my head, a pressure that made my ears ring and my heart stutter. I steadied my rifle and fired. The bullet hit the thing dead in the chest and did nothing. It looked at me and started walking in my direction. Bo noticed. He turned, still breathing hard, and took off after the giant. He climbed another tree, this one thicker than the rest, using it like a launch point. Bo hurled himself at the giant's head, fists raised, mouth open in a silent roar. But the giant caught him, with one hand, midair. The thud of Bo's impact was muffled by the sound of bones groaning under pressure. The giant squeezed, trying to crush Bo like a child's toy. Bo thrashed, headbutting the thing across the face. It stumbled back, letting go. Bo dropped, landing on all fours before scrambling back to his feet. Bo's father charged next. He slammed his shoulder into the giant's gut, forcing it back, then clawed across its face with such force that strips of flesh tore loose. The giant didn't flinch. It grabbed Bo's father by the neck and threw him into a tree so hard the trunk cracked and toppled. I was already moving, repositioning behind another grave mound, switching to my second rifle. I lined up the scope and aimed for the giant's knee. This time, it stumbled, not much, but enough. Bo saw the opening. He rushed forward, climbing another tree. His father followed. Together, they lunged. They came down on the giant from both sides, Bo hitting the back of its head, his father hammering down on its shoulder. The sheer force of their combined weight knocked the giant down to the one knee I had just shot. I took another, right into the side of its face. It roared again, but this time it was different. It was angry. The giant slammed a fist into the ground, knocking Bo's father back, then turned and backhanded Bo across the face. The blow sent him flying into one of the ancient stones, the impact loud and sharp. Bo didn't get up. I fired again. Nothing. The giant started toward him. "No," I muttered. "Not like this." I broke cover, sprinting across the clearing, rifle in hand. My boots thundered over moss and bone, and I raised the rifle and fired 2 shots into the giant's side. It turned. Then suddenly, a dogman tackled me. The weight drove the wind from my lungs. I hit the ground hard, rifle skidding across the earth. The dogman snapped at my throat, its teeth inches from my skin. I got my forearm up just in time, and it bit down. The pain was unbearable. I screamed and struggled as I used my other hand to get to my sidearm. Once I got it, I put it directly under the dogman's head, pressing hard against it. I pulled the trigger in rapid succession. It jerked once, twice, then went still. Blood poured from my arm as I rolled the thing off me, gasping. Bo was back on his feet now, face twisted in fury. He jumped at the Nephilim, grabbing its shoulders, and swung himself around its back. He locked his arm around the giant's neck, clinging like a lion bringing down prey. Bo's father came in from the front. He roared, climbed the giant like a tree, and began hammering both fists into its face. One after another, relentless. The giant buckled, then slowly dropped to the ground like a building falling over. Bo leapt free just in time, and his father landed on its chest, driving a final blow into its skull that echoed across the forest like a thunderclap. The giant stopped moving. The second dogman tried to flee, but Bo's father caught it with a tree branch, swinging like a club and shattering its spine. Silence returned. Bo turned to me, his eyes wild. Then they softened. He ran to my side and dropped to his knees. His father was behind him. I clutched my bleeding arm, my breath shallow. "It's all right," I rasped. "It's just a bite." I blacked out. When I woke, I was being carried. Bo had me over his shoulder. His father trailed closely behind, scanning the trees for threats with every step. They were taking me home. My vision swam in and out, but I could hear the wind and the sound of Bo's breathing, and I knew I was safe. Hours passed, maybe more. When they laid me down on my porch, I could smell the pine, could see the stars. Bo's father looked at me for a long while. Then he turned and disappeared into the woods. Bo stayed, staying close the entire time. The next morning, with my arm bound and stiff, I reached for the phone. Abigail answered on the first ring. "Clay?" She let out a breath. "Are you okay?" "I'm alive, but I've got something to tell you." I looked at Bo, crouched at the edge of the woods. At the world I thought I understood, now so much larger than I'd ever imagined. "This goes back further than I thought," I said, "and I think we're a part of it now." If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribe into Descent into the Unknown.